Hi, welcome to my very first episode of the Gold and the Grit podcast. I'm your host, Ann Christian, and I'm so happy that you're here. Today, I have my very first guest on named Ben Minden. I have the privilege of sitting down with him and hearing his story. He's a West Point graduate, veteran of the 101st Airborne and 3rd Ranger Battalion, an MBA graduate from Harvard Business School. But besides all the impressive accolades, and what makes Ben's story stand apart to me is what he chose to do after his path took a turn from the military and business world into the cowboy culture and ranching. Along the way, Ben saw a unique connection between two worlds that don't seem to have much in common at first: soldiers and cowboys. He noticed that veterans were craving purpose and camaraderie after leaving the military, but getting into ranching felt overwhelming without the right skills or connections. At the same time, ranching needed hardworking people with a sense of grit and dedication. Ben knew that veterans could fill that gap, so he decided to do something about it. In 2019, he launched Bearhug Cattle Co., a nonprofit that helps veterans transition into ranching. The program takes them through an intensive 10-week summer course split between Colorado and Montana, where they learn the basics of ranching, cowboying, and also getting the time and space to adjust to this new season of their life. What started as a way to share his own experience has grown into a mission to help veterans find purpose and the rich tradition of ranching, while giving the industry some much-needed fresh blood. Ben's story is all about bridging the gap, building community, and providing with the right tools that any passion is possible. I hope you all enjoyed this episode. What's up, Ben?
Nothing.
Thanks for being on the podcast.
Of course. Thank you for having me.
Yeah. Okay, so we just went over your bio. You've lived a lot of lives. What is something that you've walked through that at the time kind of felt impossible to navigate or survive, but looking back now, what do you see in yourself because of it?
I guess if I think kind of through the different things I've done, starting a nonprofit is definitely far and away the most difficult version of that. Not even like the money stuff or fundraising or anything. It's just, I think one thing, when you're in the military, it's difficult in some sense. Like, it's long hours and it's physical and it's stressful, but there is always someone who is above you who can make sure that, like, you are not going to mess up, like, right? Or if you do mess up, it's like, well, it's partially their fault too, and it's partially their boss's fault, like all the way up to whichever
Right.
general, 100 levels above you told you could do that thing. So there's this weird sense of security in the military because you always, like, even a 3-star general, like, well, there's a general above him or the president above him, like, to always, like, kind of catch some of either the credit or the blame.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas when you're starting something from scratch, like, starting the nonprofit was the first time ever probably in my life where it was like, well, if this succeeds or fails, it's completely my fault. And there was a lot more failing at the beginning, and probably still even now, than there was succeeding. And so that, just having to just beat against that for years is, like, I don't know that there was a time where I thought, like, oh, this isn't going to work or this is going to fail, but there were certainly hundreds of times where I was like, this sucks so bad. And yeah, I think maybe, like, the takeaway from that, like, looking back on it, is I would do a lot of things differently to try and avoid having to go through those kinds of things. But, like, the takeaway is, like, I think if you're trying to do the right thing, and you've got a plan, you're just willing to execute against it regardless of what happens, it's a pretty, like, the odds are you're going to be able to be successful and, like, bring that thing to fruition. And so hopefully going forward, like, we can just continue to do that with the nonprofit specifically, but, like, with whatever else in life too. It's like, yeah, you can grit your way through, like, 99% of stuff. So
That's awesome. Even without an MBA from Harvard,
yeah,
you can still do it.
Yes, you can. No advanced schooling required to be dumb.
Oh my gosh, that's so funny. Thanks for sharing that. I think there's a common misconception, especially with people like you who have been in your shoes, that there's a strength in staying silent when things are hard. But whether through Bearhug or just life in general, what have you learned about the power of vulnerability?
That's a great question. I would say there's basically, right, so like my background of the military, then like the ranching stuff, which again, like to preface it, like I'm tiny little scratching of the surface on the ranching stuff, and there are people who have decades more of knowledge and experience and all that stuff. So like just one man's perspective, but like the military is not really like a great place for vulnerability, and that a lot of that is just because of like the dynamics of how it's organizationally structured, I think, and the expectations of like hundreds of years of tradition and all that kind of stuff. And so leadership in the military context is very different. You're actually like supposed to be like anti-vulnerable in the military, and so to kind of I went to basic training 6 days after I graduated high school and did it for 10 years after that, and so I think like it takes a long time to unlearn that type of stuff, and like I said, like in the military, like there are really high stakes in some things, but there's never like I never thought like, oh, I might fail, or like we might fail in the military. So like structurally, there's not a lot of vulnerability in there, and there's a lot of like checks and balances to like really not ever put you in that tight of a spot. As a group, like personally, you could fail and stuff for sure, but like as a group or a leader, you're never really like at risk of needing to be vulnerable, because it's in my experience, right, like it's such a big group and entity and organization that you never feel like, oh, it's solely
On you.
Yeah. Then when you get out of the military and you start like doing things where people are like, well, if this is bad or this something bad happened, like there is literally no one else to look to.
Right.
I think that like brings situations in which like you might need to be vulnerable or want to be vulnerable more. And I think like after a couple years of getting out of the military and just like failing at things and just being bad at things, it just gets to a point where you're like, like there's a trusted group of people that you want to talk to about stuff, and like it almost becomes overwhelming to the point where you're like, I just gotta like blow some steam off with someone and talk to them about this. And I think, again, that's like almost a structural thing. Like in the military, you're always just in a group or a team, and so maybe you're just constantly having like micro vulnerable moments like as a group, but like when you're kind of by yourself or building something by yourself, it's like just you, and so I think there's a lot more room for being vulnerable, but just thinking through like what are the effects of being vulnerable. I think it actually helps you like get through stuff quicker, maybe than if you weren't.
Right.
Which I've tried both routes.
Yeah. Same.
And so I think if you can just like set your pride aside, especially as like an ex-military male or any person, if you could set your pride aside and be vulnerable and be like, listen, I'm not good at this, I need help, or I messed this up. Turns out I don't know as much about this as I thought I knew, and then ask for help or seek guidance or wisdom from the appropriate people. Like you could actually get further faster.
Yeah.
Which not to be like overly results based, but I think that's been super helpful, is like you can actually get more done being vulnerable and admitting that you're wrong. And then I think too with that, like failing is one of those things that like when you do it enough, like you're not worried about it anymore. And so like once you mess like the first thing up really badly and just get through it, you're like, okay, that wasn't so bad.
Sure.
Then you can go mess up a bunch more stuff, and the faster you realize that you're messing it up and can be vulnerable, ask for help, try to fix it, admit you're wrong, you just like get through it more quickly. And I think you're more open to doing things that are potentially gonna not be perfect if you're just willing to set your pride aside and, figure it out.
I think that's such good advice. And I think it does help you like get to the end result faster instead of, by yourself. I kind of think about, when you're talking, it made me think about like if you're exploring like a new mountain and you have someone there that's been there before, instead of like doing it on your own and being like, I'm going to figure it out, which you can, but it's going to take you a lot longer than if you were like, hey, you've been here before, show me around. Like,
Totally.
What's your favorite path? How do we get to this lake the fastest or whatever? Like, kind of reminded me of that. So
yeah, totally.
I love that, Ben. Okay, now we're kind of moving on to bear hug stuff. So what was it for you about ranching that made you say like, something about being on the back of a horse sorting cattle or putting in physical work on a ranch creates a sense of freedom and purpose for veterans like yourself? And what makes this career choice different than other paths that people typically take after the military?
Yeah, so maybe to understand that, might be helpful for a little bit of like context on
Sure.
how I got involved in it. Basically, it was something that I kind of always like been like, oh, that's neat, that's interesting.
Mm-hmm.
And I had been around it like from a way big distance, just in Montana, just seeing it and seeing people doing it and everything like that. Anyway, when I was still in the Army, stationed at Fort Benning, I ran into a guy, Johnny Daffin, who he still comes out every summer and helps run the program with us, but he's a cutting horse trainer in South Georgia. And he invited me out to his place. He had a bunch of nice horses and, the whole setup, and is like still to this day probably like the most open person with that stuff I've ever met. Like I don't think Bear Hug would exist without it, and like I wouldn't have been able to like be where I am without that. And so he invited me down there. I like got on one of his horses for the first time, and he, have you ever seen the flags that the cutters will work?
Yeah.
Sat me on like one of his really nice horses and worked the flag. I didn't do anything. The horse was obviously doing all of it.
Sure.
And was like, well, that's probably just the coolest thing ever. So got really into that whole thing with him. Would just ride every free moment of time I had, and got into it. And then, so when I was doing that, started showing and the cutting and then, there was one show we went to, which was a couple hours away. And if you've never been to a cutting show, right, like maybe registration's at 7 a.m. And so you get to the barn at like 3:30 or 4, load your horses up, drive 2 hours, get unloaded, get registered. There's a couple hundred people registered. You don't show on your first go until 4 p.m., right? And then everyone finishes at 8 p.m. You have to wait there to see if you make the short go. And so like it's either like a 16-hour day, or if you do good enough to make the finals, like then you're waiting another 4 hours. It could be anywhere from like 8 p.m. to midnight that you're doing your next ride.
Oh my gosh.
And then it's like, okay, 2 hours home, kick the horses out, drive 40 minutes back to wherever you live. And so I was doing it, I was having a blast, but I was like, the part about this that I actually like is when you get to go and, use a nice horse and work cows and all that stuff. And I was like, I would much rather, if I'm going to just lose money doing this, I'd much rather just pay to get to ride around a bunch of cows and like go to a practice pen or something like that. And so I started looking for more opportunities to just be horseback around cattle, like getting to do that work. So just through those deals, met a bunch of people, started getting a little bit more into the roping, got a little bit into calf roping, got a little bit into team roping, and then I was like, same thing. Like I would go to a team roping practice on a Thursday night and it'd be like, you go get your horse, you drive an hour, you run 5 steers, you drive an hour back, you unload your horse, and then drive 40 minutes home. I'm like, well, I just want to like do this more.
Yeah.
And all these ways seem like really prohibitive to like reps. Like I just want reps. I want to sit and I want to rope like 200 times. And so I was like, well, maybe if you worked on a ranch, like you would just get to do this all day. Which is not true, but like that was my thinking at that point. And so I started like just asking around people for like free help. Like you got anything to do, whether it's building fence, moving cows, working cows, whatever, like I'll do it. And so I did that there in South Georgia, Florida, Alabama.
Wow.
And then basically at that point I'd moved to North Carolina, and there was a guy who I traded some work for to let me keep my horses there. He was an old farmer who had a couple hundred cows and had no interest in taking care of them. And so I've traded him the cow work for keeping my horses there for free. And then that's kind of where like Bearhug really started to like, you know, it had started to take shape a little bit in Georgia with Johnny, just bringing buddies out and stuff like that, teaching them how to ride. Then kind of in North Carolina, it started to evolve into a little bit more where it was like, okay, we've got a set of cows and we're getting to do stuff with them. And we had like a place that we basically had free reign over. Like I said, old farmer, he was just super happy to have like someone around who could like lift stuff, move stuff, run equipment, whatever, do the work that he was no longer interested in doing. And then basically through a series of events, I decided to get out of the military. And I was like, well, I don't really know what else to like do. And so it was a Friday that I got out. I got out, like you sign your papers and you're just like out of the military. And so I got out at like 10 a.m. on a Friday, drove home, put my horses in the trailer and like drove to Montana.
Wow.
And along the way, I'm trying to remember the sequence of events, but along the way, I basically ended up stopping in Colorado and Wyoming and getting sucked into that whole ecosystem down there. And then I eventually made it to Montana, started building my house, went back to Colorado and Wyoming, all that kind of stuff. But I had kind of heard these horror stories when people get out of like, oh, well, you have no more sense of purpose, blah, 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 all this stuff. And that year, like after I got out, when I was just basically floating around to different ranches, cowboying, I just never felt like I missed a thing about the military. Like I didn't think about it once. And I guess my thesis is I realized like, well, what are the reasons that people miss the military, right? It's like you're around people that you like, you're doing meaningful work, and you have a sense of purpose. I felt like I had all that, like, in the ranching stuff. It's like, I love the people I was doing it with. And there's this myth in the military that, like, the only high-quality people in the world are, like, in the Army, and they happen to be in your unit, and, like, everyone else is inferior. And again, like, right, 10 years of getting that, like, ingrained into you, you're like, well, maybe everyone who's, like, not in the military is, you know, not as good as the people I spent my life with. That's just not the case. Like, I got involved in this like really awesome group of ranchers, and they were just as cool as like the people I was in the Army with, and they're just as hardworking. They had just as high a quality of character. Like they had just as much loyalty to like their friends and family. All the things that a person admires about the military. Like I just found a subset of people who I admired the same things in that group of people, and the work was meaningful. And I felt like I was part of a small team doing something fun. And like all the things I found in the Army, I just like, again, stumbled into just because of like where I was headed. And then I was kind of like, oh, like I think a reason that people have problems when they get out is they go into communities and work that don't have those things. And the like example that I always say is like, you know, someone gets out and they go work for corporate Walmart. It's like, yeah, they're probably not going to wake up every day pumped about like what they're doing, pumped about the people they're around.
Sure.
And right in the military, you're just like doing stuff, whether it's hot or cold or rainy or sunny. Like there's just not that same level of like grit involved with like working in corporate America as like working on a ranch. And I'm sure there are other professions that also have that, but like I've not tried any of those. Like I tried the ranching deal and it like worked pretty good. And so basically I realized like, okay, all my buddies who have gotten out and friends of friends who have gotten out like end up drinking too much, doing drugs, having trouble in their relationships, killing themselves, all that stuff. And I just felt like I was having just as good of a time as I had in the military. And I was like, okay, what's the difference? And like they went to be like a private wealth manager at Morgan Stanley, and like I went to Wyoming. And so I was like, maybe this is the reason that maybe it's not me, it's probably just like I'm a product of like the people I'm around and the stuff that I was doing. And so I was like, okay, we had done a little testing with Bearhug in Georgia. It had grown a little bit in North Carolina. Like, let's put it into play, like in a as big of a way as we can afford to out here. And then so that's what we did. And basically all those ranches I worked on that year, we like came together, and I basically said like, this is what I want to do. And they said, that's awesome. Like, count us in. It took no convincing whatsoever. It was awesome. And so I know that's a super long-winded way of answering your question, but like the path that I did seemed to work for me. And so I was like, maybe it will work for other people. And it seems like it has. And so, yeah, that's kind of we just modeled the Bearhug experience after like my experience. And now we take people who are getting out of the military, we give them a season of the exposure that I had and like send them on their way. And, you know, we haven't had anyone like come back to us and be like, well, I'm miserable, I'm going to go work at Morgan Stanley now. And so I think it's been like, right, we haven't been around for 100 years. So like, I guess time will tell if like the theory is correct, but like, it seems like it works pretty well for what we want to do. And yeah, I just think that, just my observation is that if people leave a place like the military that is so all in, and you don't have that wherever you go next, it can be a problem. And so like I said, I'm not too dumb to think that ranching is like the only profession or community that meets those criteria, but like it's a really good one, and it's one that I'm lucky enough to like know and be a part of. And so like that's the one that we can help out with.
That's amazing answer. That was like above and beyond. Thank you for that. I like the backstory a lot. Well, I was gonna ask another question, and I kind of still want to, but I was gonna say if there's like a story of that succeeding in a veteran. This is your 6th year, is that right? 5th or 6th?
Let's see.
Since 2019, right?
Yeah, 2019.
Okay, so I think that's 6.
Yeah, I don't do.
I'm not the best. Yeah, I'm not the. Yeah. Honestly, don't do it in private or public. Yeah. So same. So I guess this is your sixth year. So in the 5 years of having Bearhug, is there one particular story that stands out to you of a success like that? A guy coming through being like, yeah, this has changed my life and this is better than I expected.
Yes. And so I'll also preface this by saying like, I'm not like good with like the feelings or
that's
any
okay.
of that stuff.
That's okay.
And so, this is tangential, but I'll get there, I promise.
Okay.
So like we have over the years have had just tons of people reach out to us who are psychologists or yoga instructors or doctors or neuroscientists being like, oh, I want to integrate with what you guys do, and like maybe I could show up for a day and we could talk, to the guys about their feelings. I'm like, listen,
no,
I'm glad that you're doing that, and there are hundreds of other nonprofits focused on like sitting a veteran down on a yoga retreat and talk about their feelings and are they liking it, are they not liking it, what do they think about the transition. Like, I don't view that as my role necessarily. Like, my role and what like donors have given us money to do is like take a person, give them the skills they need to get a job. I think in the background, a lot of that stuff does go on, but like I'm not qualified nor good at like sitting down with a person in our program being like, how are you feeling? How did this
mending a fence make you feel today?
Totally. Yeah. And it's like I'm glad there are people in the world that can do that stuff. That is not my strong suit. Like my strong suit theoretically is like I can like bring donors together, bring resources together, bring ranches together to like give you an experience, and like I know that is where my skill set ends. That being said, like we have had enough people go through the program now and have given feedback, unsolicited feedback or solicited feedback that we had someone from this last year basically say like he didn't know what his life would look like without this program. And like he's working on a ranch here in Montana right now, and
It's so cool.
like the impact that has is super super neat. And I think that is the experience that everyone has in the program. It's like, I think when you go from the military, which is a super cool profession, to ranching, which is also a really rewarding and cool profession, like it's hard to imagine like going working at corporate Walmart after that. And so that's when our experience and like kind of the way we measure that without sitting down and like talking about it explicitly is, do people continue doing the ranching thing? And so far the answer is resoundingly yes.
Let's go.
And so that's kind of how we like
measure
measure that kind of stuff. And again, like I wish I was better at
it's amazing.
that other, you know, component of it, of like, you know, sitting down with the person and like, has this made you happier or whatever, but it's just not what like anyone at Bearhug is good at. So.
And I think it's okay, because I honestly also think like the work, the environment that you're setting up, the community you're setting up, and then also like the horses, they do that for you.
Totally.
Because if whoever's watching, if you've ever been around horses, like just being around horses makes you feel some type of way. There's like something about them, the vulnerability aspect, the fact that you're getting on an animal maybe for the first time. Some of these guys have never ridden. You are putting yourself in such a vulnerable state. It brings out all these emotions to the top. Like maybe some they've never dealt with since like they graduated a school or boot camp or whatever their experience in the military. But like, I think that stuff that you're setting up and like you said, you're putting into place perfectly is doing that job for you.
Yeah.
And those guys probably don't want to sit around a circle and have a seance. Like they would rather be ranching.
Yes.
You know?
No, I totally agree. And it's funny that you mentioned that, because like we have learned, so like Bearhug has evolved a lot since 2019, right? 2019, it was like me bringing like a buddy to come ride for, you know, 2 days on a weekend. And then it got a little bit more, and now it kind of is what it is, which is our full program. But it's been so, I think the thing that's so fascinating is like, I could, like if I had a whiteboard, I could show you exactly like how a person is going to feel on any given day of the program, like to a T. Yeah. And it was so funny, you know, the first year it was like, oh, okay, like this is interesting. And then the second year was like, wow, this is exactly like
repetitive.
Different group of guys have the same feelings at the same points in this program. And
they're probably talking about them with each other too.
Totally. Yeah. And to your point about like the horses bringing that out, it's so funny. And like it's such a known thing at this point for like me and Johnny, who have seen it a bunch of times now. Like, right, the first day, it's like, okay, you're gonna get a horse. Now, imagine a Ranger squad leader who's literally gotten out of the Army on Friday and shows up to Bearhug on Monday. Like, his whole existence as an adult male has been like, he thinks about something and there's like 6 privates who are going to go do it instantly. Like he wants to go this way, like everyone goes this way. He wants to do X, Y, or Z, like it just happens. There is no like negotiating, there's no asking, there's no like there's no delay, there's nothing. And so like that is a function of like how the military needs to work. Like things need to happen super quickly, and like the smartest person is the squad leader in that squad, and like they have the most experience and they have the, you know, the right answers. And like, so if they say like go left, like you just go left. And there's no debate about it. There's no like, well, I'm tired, I don't want to go left. Like they tell you to go left, they tell you how fast to go, they tell you how far to go. Like there's no negotiating there. And then you take that person, you put them on a horse, and they don't have that same level of control over start, stop, left, right, anything. And it's like, you can just see the frustration like getting worked out, because you're taking this person who's been basically like the king of their own little universe for so long, and then this is their first exposure outside of the military to like, and it's a really good wake-up call that it's like, hey, this is not the military anymore. Like people just don't do what you want because you said it. Like you're you're no longer the smartest, most experienced person. Like you no longer have like a legal authority to tell someone to do this and like they have to do it. It's like you're on a 1,000-pound animal. You're not stronger than it. it's more experienced than you. You're the least experienced part of this equation. It's like, now we're hoping that you can go make a living with this thing. And so they get super frustrated in the beginning because it's like, I should just be able to tell this thing what to do.
Yeah.
Like, I'm telling it to go forward, and it's not going forward. And one of the parts about it every year that I love, which I think is it's like so good for the people in the program, and I just love to watch it, is like, right, we'll have like a super nice horse, and we'll put the guys up on it and say like, okay, just try and go forward, stop, back up, and that's it. Like, just walk in a straight line, stop, and back up in a straight line. It's like, it's an impossible task for these guys for the most part. And it always is like, well, I'm doing what you told me to do. Like, I'm squeezing to go forward, and I'm letting go to stop, and I'm doing this to go backwards. And it's like, well, this horse just like isn't doing it. And it's like, I promise you it is not the horse. I promise you it is you. And like, that's a lesson you're going to learn 100 times this summer. It's like, it is not the horse's fault. It is your fault. And that's like a big pill for like a tough Ranger squad leader, the equivalent from any branch of service, to like swallow that pill. Is like, I promise you, you're the issue, not the equipment, not the horse, not the cow. And then, you know, we'll say, hey, Johnny, why don't you just climb up on this horse and do it?
Show him.
And then like, he'll, like, this 60-year-old man will like climb up on this horse, do it perfectly, you know, like in tennis shoes. And it's like, okay, it is not the horse, like, it is me. And like, even then, like, you could do that 5 times and they're still like, it's the horse, like, I don't know. And so it's so fun to watch people work through that and say, okay, like, maybe for the first time in my adult life, like, I am the problem here, and like, I am not good at something. And then watching people have to work through figuring out what that means for their ego, what that means for their pride, what that means for like their vision of how they view themselves as like this all-star. It's like, it's a really, like, and we've seen it every year, it is a really interesting thing to watch people go through, but it's super cool when they get through it. And, you know, then like week 2 or 3, they're kind of getting past it, and then they're getting a little confidence, and then you ask them to do like the next level of difficulty, like, okay, start, stop, turn around, and go over here. And it's like, then the confidence plummets again, because they realize like they thought they were good at it for a little bit, and they got through the first part, and then it plummets again. And it's like this big journey of like ups and downs through the whole thing, until like at the end they're like, yeah, I'm actually not good at this, and it's going to take me 20 years to get good at this. And it's really neat to watch people like work and learn through that experience. It happens every year like clockwork.
I love that.
No matter who you are. And it's not like we keep this a secret and like try and watch the guys fail. Like, when we get them in on the first night, we have like a 3-hour sit down of like, here are the answers to the test. Like, here's how you should act, here's what you should say, here's what you should do, here's the way you can be most successful. Like, and this is not just Ben saying this stuff, like, this is intel I've collected from a dozen ranchers with 100 years of experience. Like, here are the keys to success, here's exactly how you're going to feel. Like, we give them the answers to the test, and still, like, it's one of those things like you have to go through in order to like know what it is. And you could tell people, listen, you're gonna be frustrated. I promise you, you're gonna be frustrated the first 5 days you're riding a horse. You've never done it before, and you can tell them that, and they'll be like, no, come on, I'm not gonna be frustrated. Like, I'm cool, it's all good. And then like the 3rd day of a horse not doing what they wanted to do, it's like it will unravel the best person in the world who's not prepared for that. So I think it's a really cool, you know, thing to watch people go through with the horses. And then it's super neat to watch them come through it and, you know, grow, and the horses grow with them, and they grow with the horses, and they start to get like the first, you know, 1/1,000,000% of like understanding of how the whole thing works. And it's super cool. It makes it really fun.
Yeah, it's like, I feel like you're just saying it's like a really good humbling tool.
Totally.
Yeah.
I've been doing it for a fair bit of time now. I'm like, that's why I love riding with people who are better than me, which is not a high bar, but it's like you
learn so much.
You can just learn so much. And like, anytime you think you're on the way to like being good at it, it's like you just ride with someone, like the guys we ride with in our program, like all the guys up at Little Belt, all the guys down in Walden, Colorado, all the guys in Wyoming, like they're actually good at it. And then you go and ride with them and you're like, okay, this was a good reminder that I am like very early in my process. Because like if not, right, if you're just riding around by yourself in the arena, you could be like, I might be good at this. I might be good at this.
Yeah,
thing.
Maybe I'm good.
And then you go ride with someone who actually knows what they're doing. You're like, okay, I am not good and I have a long way to go and I need to remember that. And so I think it's always helpful. Like I learn every year. Like I feel like every year we've been doing it, like I personally learn more every year about horsemanship and all that kind of stuff. And so it's just a super fun thing to be able to like help maybe usher people into that, trajectory of like, yeah, you're going to be bad at this for 20 years, but like you should keep trying because it's super fun.
Yeah, I've been riding since I was 7, and I will say, like, out of everyone I ride with, I'm still the least experienced. Like, I still don't know what I'm doing, I feel like.
Which I feel like that just means you're like riding with the right people.
That's
like
right.
If you find yourself riding and you're like the best one, like you've either turned into Buck Brannaman and like that's okay, or like you're just not, trying to get better.
That's so true. Okay, so ranching is full of unexpected moments. What is the funniest or most memorable mishap that you've had with your guys since starting Bearhug, I guess?
There are so many each year. I'll pick a couple. One of the earlier programs, I had just gotten like this white button down for work and I was like super stoked about it. Anyway, we're in Walden, Colorado. A lot of it is just hay, like irrigated hay meadows, and they turn out a bunch of yearlings on them for the summer and all that kind of stuff. I was just learning about irrigation ditches and the variety of irrigation ditches a field can have. Some of them are like the bottom is hard and you could just walk right across them, they're 6 inches deep. Some of them the bottom's hard and they're 6 feet deep. Some of them the bottom is soft and no matter where you cross, they're uncrossable. And it's really hard to know from looking at a ditch like where they can cross. Anyway, so I went and was with one of the guys and roped this yearling, and I was riding my Huck horse, and he was a 2-year-old, and so like very, very fresh. But we were having a good day, and so went and roped this yearling, and it was right by a ditch, and I had, I don't know, 20 feet of rope out or something like that, and it was a pretty slow deal. It was nice, good one for a 2-year-old. This yearling went across this ditch, and it was like 6 inches deep, and like I could see the bottom, and went across this ditch, and I was like, okay, like I have him roped, so like I'm just gonna cross the ditch right where I am, and it looked exactly the same as where he crossed, and I just remember like taking one step in there on this 2-year-old, and like his head was underwater. Like the bottom, it was like a fake bottom or like super muddy, and his head was just underwater. And then I just remember, him trying to climb up out the other side, and I was flying through the air. Like he went down and then up the other side so fast that I was just flying through the air, and I had the rope still in my hand, but I was airborne, no longer on this horse. And luckily he still is a good horse, but he just basically climbed up the other side. My rope had wrapped around my saddle. So this yearling was on one end of the rope, which was around my saddle, and I was up to my neck in mud, holding onto the rope, which was around my horse, which was attached to this yearling. So I kind of shimmied up the rope, climbed out, got back on, finished doctoring the yearling, and then an hour later met up with everyone who was off doctoring in their own little sections or whatever, and the guy who runs that deal is we kind of all met up, and I kind of rode up last, and I was covered in black mud, in this new white shirt from my collarbone down, and everyone was really quiet, and he just looked at me and goes, "Did you fall off your horse?" I was like, "Yes, I fell off my horse." I was in this ditch up to my neck. It was a wreck, and stuff like that has just happened. I mean, something like that happens every other week with the guys or with me or whatever. Yeah, like people hit bogs and ditches and all kinds of stuff.
Has anyone ever gotten thrown off really bad? Not like really bad, like scary hospital bad, but like...
No, we've never had anyone get hurt.
Okay.
And
That's
every
amazing.
year I'm the person who comes off a horse the most.
Okay.
Are
you riding the newer horses mostly?
I'd like to think that would be a good excuse of like, oh, I'm riding younger horses or something, which is maybe directionally true that normally I'm riding like a 2 or 3 or 4 year old or something, and maybe trying to do more than a person should. But like last year, or 2 years ago, like I was going to rope a yearling and it was kind of wet out, and like I had it roped and the yearling like took a turn and like my horse just slipped all 4 feet out. And so it was actually pretty crazy. Like it slipped all 4 feet out and I like landed like standing on my feet, still holding the rope. And the horse was laying down between my legs, and just same horse too, huh? And he just stood back up and we kept going.
No.
And yeah, so like stuff like that happens, I feel like, more than it should. But
wow.
Yeah, so that was, I mean, that's a good one. But stuff even outside of the horse stuff happens like all the time. One day, a couple years ago, the guys up at Little Belt, I think they were building some corrals. They wanted a hand. I had some stuff to do, so I sent all the guys up there to go build corrals and like kind of help but also learn about how to build corrals. And they were driving the old Bearhug truck, and I was like, listen, this is our only truck. Please, you need to be really careful in this truck. You need to tell, like, whoever's up there, you need to leave before dark, so you're back here before dark, because, like, you are going to hit a deer on the way home. Like, and that stretch of road between them and us, like, the guy who manages that ranch, who's a buddy, like he's hit 4 deer in one night on that road. Like it is 100% guarantee you're gonna hit a deer if you're driving past like 9 p.m. on that road in the summer. And I was like, you need to be home before dark. You need to be home before dark. And anyway, it's like dark and the guys are not back. And they had got caught up going to dinner, going to the bar with the guys up there, whatever. I don't even remember what it was. But they came back at like 10 or 11 o'clock at night, and one of the like Bearhug guys who was driving just like handed me my pistol that was in the truck that was empty, and it was like, we hit a deer. And he was like, we had to shoot it on the side of the road. And I was like, you guys should not be allowed to go anywhere unsupervised. Like, and that kind of stuff just happens all the time, which is good. That's part of like why we're there. Is like, again, like in the Army, like it would be like, okay, be back by dark, and I'm going to call you an hour before dark to make sure you're leaving. It's like, this is real life. You need to learn that, like, no one's going to be there to hold your hands. If, like, someone gives you the answer to your test, like, you could either listen to it or you could not listen to it. And, like, no one's going to care which one it is. They're just going to care about, like, how it turns out. And so there are just things like that all the time that happen. Yeah, I have endless Bearhug stories, but yeah, no real wrecks.
That's good.
We're pretty like, when the guys in the program, and I'm saying guys or gals, whatever, when the guys in the program are like doing stuff horseback or starting to rope or out of branding, like we are very watchy. And like if like someone's even within 10 miles of getting in a wreck, like we will stop it and get in there before something bad happens, which like no one, like we don't give ourselves that courtesy of like stopping something before it turns into a wreck, but like we're really, really, really careful with the guys, because like we don't want them to get hurt, we don't want the horses to get hurt,
right.
We don't want something bad to happen. Like I said, we don't really do that for ourselves, but like thinking back through the years, like the like percentage wise, the people who fall off their horses the most are like the people at Bearhug, and like the people actually working on the ranches that we're at. Like the guys almost like they're pretty tame for the most part and stuff like that. But yeah, there's always a bog or a ditch or a deer or a moose to chase or whatever. This last year, we were in Walden, Colorado, and it was like, yeah, it was really early on, like first or second week. We're just out riding with one of these ranches, and there was a bear in this big sage flat, and I had peeled off with like half of the guys, and half of the guys went with the like the cow manager on that place, and it was one guy who was like this really quiet, sweet guy, and it was him and the manager on that place, and he's you know, he's awesome. He's a Mexican guy, and he's got like this really awesome way of like, he's always excited and all this kind of stuff. His name's Luis Moya. He's the man. But they came up. So one Bearhug guy, his second week ever on a horse, and this guy who's been on a horse his whole life, and they would come across this bear in the sage flat, and Luis just turns around and goes, "Grab your saddle horn," and just peels out after this bear, and like the Bearhug guy is literally like just double fisting his saddle horn because he couldn't, like, he knew his horse was gonna just take on after his, and the guy wanted to chase it, and so he's just, and like we're like 3 miles away on the other side of this piece, and we could just see this going down. And it's just like, oh god, this is gonna be a disaster. And yeah, so stuff like that.
I bet he loved it though.
Oh,
your guy was like, that was the best time of my life.
I was like, yeah, just holding on. I couldn't steer, didn't know how to stop, but we were chasing this bear, and yeah, so like there's a lot of.
Did they get him?
They did not catch that one. Not that they would if they got close.
Of course not. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny. Like with that same guy, actually, a bunch of years before that, we had chased like a bunch of coyotes and stuff through a similar field, and like there was probably 6 or 7 of us that time, and we were just. And again, like we try and keep it very slow and calm and collected and tame for the guys for like safety reasons, but sometimes you just get in those situations where the boss just, you know,
sends it.
Yeah, just goes for it, and then like you have to, you know, what are you gonna just not?
Right.
You can't.
Right.
And so like you end up with like the person in charge, and then like 5 people just trying to keep up, like chasing a coyote or a bear or a moose or something like that. So,
that's just cowboying, right?
Yeah, it's just part of it, I guess.
I love it.
But yeah.
Those are really good stories.
Yeah.
Thank you for sharing those. Those are awesome. All right, last question. Back to kind of you, Ben. If you could sit face to face with a younger version of yourself during a particularly hard season, what would you say to him? To you?
Probably it's not that big of a deal.
Yeah.
Like, I think I'm really particular about like relationships with people, and I want to make sure that like we or I have the best relationships possible with neighbors or people we work with or someone we run into at dinner or whatever. Like it's very top of mind for me. Mm-hmm. And so when, like, if I think back of like what are the biggest sources of frustration I've had with Bearhug, it's either when I or someone who works at Bearhug or one of the people in Bearhug or someone affiliated with Bearhug has like done something or said something or not said something or whatever that's caused like what in my mind is like, oh man, like this person's gonna hate us or they're gonna think we're doing something wrong or whatever. And so that has probably been the biggest source of like stress about Bearhug is like I just deeply like want to do the right thing. I cherish the community and cherish like the time and effort and relationships that people have given to us. So when something jeopardizes that, like I take it really seriously.
Yeah.
But like I think, like looking back on it, it's like a big deal to me, but like the person that like I was thinking about on the other side of that equation is like, what are you even talking about? Like we were not offended by like the fact that you guys drove in this gate instead of that gate or whatever, you know, little things like that, but just personnel things or timing things. Like we had sent someone to go drop off some horses and they were like an hour late because there was a bunch of road construction. I was like, it's the end of Bearhug, you know, this guy's never going to trust us to show up on time again. we can't even like, you know, right, like check the road conditions before, whatever. I was like freaking out about it that time. I was like, oh, this is the worst. This is the end of Bearhug. Like, we've ruined this relationship. This guy's going to be sitting there on the side of the road waiting for us for an hour. And, you know, if we can't even show up on time, how's he going to trust us to take care of cattle? How's he going to think that we care about his time? Like, all that stuff. And just like, yes, those things are all, at, like, you know, to some small degree probably true, but not to the degree which in the moment I was thinking they were true. And I think a lot of that is like, if you just try to build good relationships with people over a long enough period of time, like, they can give you grace, like when you mess stuff up. And so like I would go back to myself in those moments and just be like, it's not a big deal, like, you mess this one up, like, just keep going and like fix it on the next one and like fix it on the next 10. But it feels like a big deal in those moments.
Yeah, it's a great piece of advice. I feel like I was thinking of some stuff in my life that I needed that for. So thank you.
Yeah, of course.
Thank you so much for sharing all of the things that you did, your story, the little moments at Bearhug that were funny and great, and yeah, all the advice that you shared. I hope that everyone listening gleans a lot of wisdom from your words.
Awesome. Thank you for having me.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Thanks,
Appreciate
Ben.
it.
Yeah, thanks.